Alrighty, everyone. It's John Chang with Dan Edmonds, and
Hello.
we're back to talk about revisiting Westworld. So since the last time, which was actually our first discussion about originals versus remakes, we had this new season of Westworld, and as it turned out, they've been renewed for a fourth season. So I think what we'll do is kind of basically start by talking about how the original Westworld had a sequel called Futureworld, and we'll kind of dive into the things that they kind of may have inspired the Westworld series, and yeah, we'll kind of go from there. So first thing is like the original Westworld, excuse me, Futureworld was made in '76 with Peter Fonda and Blythe, and it definitely had a Disneyland theme park feel to it. It introduces a character who wins a contest to get onto the, um, the future world, and then also what we had is a scenario that the reporters are investigating kind of strange goings on since the return of or the reopening of the Westworld and stuff. Dan, like, I guess what were your thoughts in terms of how this was a sequel follow up to the original Westworld?
Yeah, I mean it picks up, it tries to sort of pick up where the other one left off. You've got the corporate um governors of Delos trying to do damage control on their public image after a massacre in the park. It seems quite ridiculous that they would even reopen it given the
Right.
circumstances. But I mean, I suppose that kind of shows you the idea of this company with a huge amount of power can even sway this much bad press. And that's in season 3 of the new TV show, we're picking up in a similar place. The
Mm,
massacres ended, and we've got a lot of corporate wranglings over how you actually what you do with this company.
mm,
Likewise, the big theme of Future World is this idea that they're taking important people
mm,
and around the globe, and they're replacing them with the robots,
yeah.
and that is somewhat kind of touched on in the TV show, in that you've got sort of Charlotte Hale is now replaced by a
Mm,
host, and also
right.
kind of William, sorry, spoiler alert, right at the end. So they're definitely borrowing themes from it, and this idea that I think on a bigger scale that the AI is about to infiltrate the real world.
Mm,
That's the theme of, I think, Future World, or the impending threat of it. They don't really do it in the original
mhm,
in the '76 movie, but that's kind of what's implied. The
right.
other thing, as we just discussed, is they stole the red gowns from Future World and added them into the original Westworld, which I
Right.
hadn't noticed before. Um, so yeah, there's this, and I guess there's this idea of it's somewhat of a kind of a '70s paranoia
Mm,
movie, in that is the person you love really the host, or is it the human? So there isn't really much of that, I wouldn't say,
mm,
in in the new TV show. You just kind of, but I mean, most of the TV show revolves around the host. It doesn't really revolve around humans very much at all, really,
right.
which is something I'll come into later. But yeah, those are the sort of takeaways of things that I thought they borrowed from it.
Yeah, and I think the conspiracy idea is something that is definitely expanded on in the Westworld series because we, got to see in season 3, just a glimmer of the fact that like, oh, like kind of, not only was the park basically a place for people to indulge and all that. But meanwhile, like kind of all this data is being apparently collected about all the visitors and stuff, and that they were, as we saw, was this, basically captured in this huge library. And we've talked about it before. It was fascinating the idea that like basically it only took like about a book's worth of data to, you know, duplicate a human being and stuff. Versus like kind of the hosts, which are definitely kind of more complex. Which I think as we'll get into this season 3, that they kind of expanded more on that idea too. That like are humans in fact like kind of the ones with the simpler coding, if you will, and like kind of our routines, all that, as we've talked about before as well. That like sometimes it does seem like we fall into these routines that are just, or these loops, if you will, that probably aren't as sophisticated as we like to believe we are.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I definitely there's a lot of meat on the bones in terms of that subject, and that seems to be pretty much one of the main. It's funny that that was something that you kind of discussed or you picked up on in the last season, and that's very much been the theme this season.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, just on a more sort of ironic, taking a step back level, they've got this one book that contains all of human sort of consciousness, and yet the AIs are supposed to be vastly complex. But I feel kind of on a meta level, the writing in this season, they seem to simplify a lot of the characters compared to previous seasons, which is there was probably a lot of criticisms of the kind of general confusion level of season 2 compared to season 3. But it did seem a little bit simplistic, I think, some of the characters in this. So I just found that a little bit, I didn't feel there was many gray areas that were being that much explored, or if they were, it was kind of all in the last 5 minutes of the show. So, but anyway, that was just my take on it. But yeah, definitely in terms of the predictive loops, people's behavior being encoded was very much the theme of this season. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Decoding Westworld podcast, I'll definitely share the link to that. Chen and Joanna, I always forget her name, to be honest, but they definitely talked a lot more about the idea that, like, the shift in tone of, like you said, from more complex and ambiguous in some ways ideas of like kind of the characters, what's going on and stuff like that. They definitely shifted to more straight out action, oriented season 3 and stuff. And I think in some ways it worked for how it showed, like, kind of that the human world that we thought would be in some ways so different from the park. It did show that, like, how, like, in other ways, that the world we live in is like kind of just like this reflection of like kind of this fake world, so especially with like kind of as we'll get into in the series, that this whole artificial intelligence that's kind of controlling things. So I definitely don't want to go too much into that, because like now I feel like we're kind of really getting to the discussion about the series, but I did want to kind of just hint at that, how like the shift in tone definitely did in some ways, like, kind of show things beyond, like, kind of the creative choices, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, that was definitely the theme, was trying to show that the human world was controlled in the same way as the AI world. If you've got some super powerful, centralized, massive mega brain controlling everything, which is kind of, I mean, Jonathan Nolan sort of said in one of the interviews that it's not so much in terms of it's not like we're looking towards the Matrix. It's more like we've already created this overlay of Matrix-like behavior through sort of pattern recognition in AI and social media. So I think they kind of did their own version of that with Rehoboam. But I mean, there are various kind of criticisms I would make of Rehoboam in general. I mean, did no one back it up? How many infrastructure engineers were consulted on that? It's like, and also, there's this discussion which I picked up in Robin Hanson's book of how you would actually govern a world of super fast AI across the globe, because the problem you have is the speed of light and latency. How do you actually create one super brain that controls everything? Because there could be events happening on one side of the world, and just the latency of the information getting back, being able to process it in time, would impact some of those decisions and introduce errors. So you couldn't have a really perfect functioning system. Also, there's this, I mean, and I want to get into this later, is this idea that you can, say, make copies of each AI, which is basically another thing they talked about, and they did in season 3. But then that also introduces errors, which we've seen with the Hale Dolores thing, characters. So there's a lot of these sort of issues being introduced, but the idea of this one big central brain governing everything and no one taking any backups of it ever was a bit difficult for me to swallow, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, to kind of like I said, we only want to kind of get into the series so much at this point. Just to kind of go back to Futureworld, I think it was interesting that they originally had human controllers, which I think was reflected in Westworld, and in some ways, I think what they basically decided was to have the robots, controlling the mission control and stuff like that, and so you have machines being controlled by machines and stuff, which in theory, kind of makes sense, like you said, or like they said in the story, that it definitely eliminates some human error and stuff like that, because by the very just the name of it too, that like once you have people controlling things, there's just going to be a progression of errors, that people, because they can't respond fast enough, or that different times their rationale or their logic is going to be as perfect, if you will, as a machine's. But here's the funny part about all that, is that in which I feel like that's going to be reflected in both the series and this movie, is that ultimately it's people designing this stuff, so that's in itself just an introduction to or that it's just as perfect as you can make something. I feel like we're going to have the Windows effect, kind of weird. Windows was definitely known in its day for the fact that, like, yeah, we're going to get this version out there and we're going to have to fix it with future patches. Again, that was their Microsoft's approach and stuff. And I feel like that's just going to be something that, like, whether we're talking about, Futureworld or Westworld in the future or something like that, it's just the fact that, like, at any given stage, it's always going to have some level of error.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the idea of error correction in general. I mean, you can also sort of take science as a another different form of that, in that scientific theories are constantly adapting and being patched, so to speak, and that's going to be how I think we have to deal with intelligence as we engineer it.
Yeah, and if anything, it's what you just said though about science and how if we look at how maybe, like, originally we kind of thought that the speed of sound was going to be the defining limit of speed and stuff, of course, until we broke it. And right now we see the speed of light as, like, kind of the boundary, so to speak. And I'm guessing, I kind of just more by intuition, that at some point we're going to find a way to beat that. I mean, that's just, I kind of just, I mean, granted, I'm talking heresy and defying the laws of physics and stuff, but I feel like that's something that, like, is still, just the limit of our, it's more a reflection of a limit of our knowledge to me than a actual physical limit. And I feel like that's in each case what we're constantly coming up against.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, you're really just trying to create almost exact or very predictable data sets in different locations that won't be affected by the speed of light, which we're still not, we haven't cracked that one yet, but apparently they have in 30 years time. So I didn't know if you I mean, that was the other thing. Apparently it is 30 years in the future. That's the idea. So but this idea of sort of humans, again, this is kind of mirrored in the new season. We realized that more of the humans were actually hosts, which is that because they were the control mechanisms that he introduced. But that's also a great way of just keeping characters that people liked around as well. But
yeah, I thought major spoiler alert, the hook of, like, kind of down to the last scene of not knowing whether, like, it was the right character that survived and stuff. I thought that was a bit of suspense, but it was definitely, like, kind of what you call it, also a besides being a device, like, kind of for that suspense and stuff. um, it's kind of like it was interesting how like they were able to pull that off and stuff like that because I thought that like in fact like kind of it was Peter Fonda's character that was killed and stuff, and then that there that was going to be like kind of the catch, right? Like like we which you have with like sci-fi horror and stuff that like oh it's actually the robot that like kind of survived and got out of the park and everything.
Yeah, no, I thought that was quite clever as well because I was convinced that they were going to make one of them because it's a '70s movie. Normally they're pretty
Right,
bleak,
right.
so I really did. I really thought Peter Fonda was going to be the robot when we left, but
So it's kind of and I guess that's the funny thing too that like in the end if they wanted to they could still make it where the robot is so good, right, that like it kind of it was the robot flipping off like kind of the scientists and stuff, and
yeah,
if they designed it that way, I guess, because it's not like the pod people where they're emotionless and everything. The robots apparently are good at expressing emotion in the future world.
well, yeah. I mean that was quite an interesting idea that some of the robots seem to be more emotive than the humans to some degree.
Hmm.
Um, and
Right, right.
I
When you
mean, I don't
said
mean that
that,
in terms of their acting, but I mean,
well, when you
yeah,
said that, it made me think of that scene, right, where Harry, I guess, like kind of is like leaving behind the one robot and stuff, and uh,
yes,
or is being left behind, and
yeah. He displays his sorrow by doing this
emoting.
with his robot face because his robot face can't express anything because there's no features on it.
Right.
But yeah, that was, and I think it was just interesting that they when the Texan game show winner is meeting the various different models of robots, he's like saying, "Hey, you're pretty gorgeous," because of course that's his whole
Hmm.
thing all the way through is who can you have sex with, and
Right.
and she just goes, "Oh no, I'm model 400. You can't have sex with me. I'm not programmed for that." That's that kind of weird sort of mechanistic Disneyland sort of take on it,
Mm,
as opposed to where in Westworld, where the newer one, where that every robot is there to try and it's there to try and fool you as much as possible. That's the idea,
right.
is to create create the illusion as seamless as possible, whereas it's
Yeah.
more delivered to you as a service in the future world.
Yeah, and I think in Westworld we didn't have that as overt. I felt that the original movie, this idea of like kind of that everybody wanted to have sex with the robots, right? Where like kind of and I don't know if it was because of the time period or like whether that was like a shift of it, like kind of because we started getting it into I guess more the swing '70s, I guess at that point, and so maybe that was more like kind of just I don't know the attitude, and then like certainly in the Westworld series they've talked about different times that like that it seems like one of the main reasons why like, kind of the people visit Westworld and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I came into the HBO season quite naively, and I started. Well, I mean, it's an HBO season, a TV show, but I was there going, "Well, there's an awful lot of sex in this. I don't remember this much sex being in the 1973 original." But yeah, they definitely. I mean, yeah, it obviously occurred to the makers in '76 that this
Yeah,
is what people would obviously do.
right. And I guess
Um,
the thing that we have to kind of remember too is that the original was based on Michael Crichton's kind of vision and writing and stuff like that. And I
mm,
mean, I certainly I'm sure it occurred to him, but I think he was more fascinated with the idea of this theme park and like kind of using robots for it and stuff. And I feel like it was less about the sensationalism and stuff and like with the, the future world, I think it was like kind of that they wanted to kind of expand on it and kind of get more into like kind of like what would people go to a robot theme park to do and stuff like that.
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, and I think again, as we talked about in Andromeda Strain, it's his idea is of the human achievement of creating these
Mm,
lifelike robots, and then with the human error of introducing a glitch, just like
yeah,
in Jurassic Park, it's
right,
the
right,
running wild, and Andromeda Strain, it's people making silly mistakes
yeah,
with lab tech equipment. So Yeah, it's a similar thing, but yeah, I think all things. It's probably not the greatest of movies, Future World, but I think in a funny sort of way they picked up on a lot of the themes. You know, they didn't really express it that well, I think, was the problem, and it was a very simple story that was encapsulated. But
And also, I thought it was interesting how, I guess it was pre-Viking where when they went to Mars, it was like blazing red. I mean, it wasn't like just kind of like, just
yeah,
reddish, it was like kind of just, I mean, other than like kind of like maybe, like kind of slight darker contrast and stuff, it was just like bright red.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
yeah. It's like, please put on your red spectacles now and watch people ski. So yeah, well, and I don't understand why skiing on Mars would be fun anyway. Really, would it actually? Just the mechanics of it would actually be fun. I don't know, but anyway, it's something.
And also, like, other than that, it was like kind of just a lot of running around in the utility room. I mean, that's really what most the movie was.
Yeah, we had a lot of scenes of pipes and engineering places, which was
ducking around and being shot at and avoiding being shot at, and that was it. So
yeah, but fair dues to Peter Fonda. He did keep me guessing at the end, and yeah, Blythe was good too, I suppose, given with what they were given, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that's interesting is, of course, you've got basically one evil genius, which is a sort of a bit of a James Bond theme going on there.
Oh, absolutely.
Running sort of, the entire show. And I thought the twist, obviously, in the new one was quite an interesting way to sort of reinterpret that, because there was, towards the end of this latest season, I did kind of think I was watching like The Bourne Identity or James Bond, because it did kind of seem like anyone running around shooting each other with an evil genius, kind of trying to track them down. But then my, expectations were subverted towards the end, at least.
So yeah, I think that's a a good transition to talking about the new season and stuff. And certainly, I think what for me, flaws aside of season 3, it just basically continues the conversation about some of the key things that really makes us attracted to the Westworld series. The ideas of free will versus programming we kind of touched on already and stuff. And for me, like as I kind of mentioned, was that it's interesting how like the human world really reflects the Westworld, and we I kind of, to me, the other part that like what that really my idea of it was that, like, in some ways religion and kind of like how we talked about Rehoboam and stuff as this kind of intelligence of that kind of is guiding all the different things going on and stuff. I feel like in some ways that even if they didn't intentionally do it, but to me, like, it really made me look at how a lot of ways religion has been kind of counted on as like kind of this kind of this energy that basically is this intelligence that, like, if we follow it, then it'll lead to a better world and all that. And to me, like, kind of that's what we're hoping like kind of was a reflection of. And I don't know if you've seen the series American Gods, but so that's based on a book by Neil Gaiman. And one of the key things there was that, like, this idea that in the old world they had all these different gods, right? Whether it's the Vikings or the Greek mythology, all that. And when our ancestors, kind of colonized, kind of the new world, they left a lot of that behind. And subsequent to that, they kind of picked up these new gods, if you will, like as we see in modern technology, and kind of what we call it, the media, or kind of even the internet stuff. In some ways, that we've kind of now believe in, technology is like kind of the solution to making the world a more predictable place, a place that we can kind of basically, just control our lives better and stuff. And certainly, what we're seeing also in the current crisis with the coronavirus and kind of the current pandemic and stuff, is that with all that technology, there's still a limit to that control that we can have.
Absolutely. No, I think you're absolutely right about the religion. I mean, a religion is essentially it's a set of instructions based around a script, more or less. And this is exactly, but the difference is the asynchronous nature of the technology. Because rather than it being a centralized script that we all go to one place to follow, now we've got it all fed to us individually. And we can dip in and out of these scripts as we want to, but it is still an organizing principle. So yeah, I think that's definitely a similarity. But I think and it's generally the sort of the asynchronous nature of technology that is something else that I think is sort of shown in Westworld, in that our human experience is that we are synchronous. Our mind and our experience is tied to our bodies.
Right.
Whereas, an AI host can be in lots of different bodies. It can live many lives. And I think it's really good, the fact that they try to explore this area of, knowledge, but unattached to a single sort of physical body or an even, a location or anything like that.
Yeah, and as a machine, that the experiences that they have are just, besides like kind of being able to kind of access the past as easily, it's also a perfect kind of copy of it. Like, in other words, our memory as human beings is like more than imperfect. It's like kind of, I mean, to say that, things get a little fuzzy is kind of like like an understatement. The other thing that kind of happens as well is that we have things like, Alzheimer's, and which actually is shown a little bit in this a couple times. And that's interesting as well, because Caleb, of course, bring Aaron Paul into the fold here for the Westworld cast and stuff like that. He comes back to his mother, who doesn't recognize him, and so we see a little bit of that. And then kind of Bernard Arnold goes back to his wife, human wife and stuff like that, and she remembers him as Arnold, and but she's like kind of we see that she's suffering some Alzheimer's, because the nurse that apparently was with her saying that she's having one of those good days. And so that's definitely like kind of just shows that how kind of that's one of the things that's our limit as a human being, is that like besides like kind of how fuzzy things are normally, at different times things like disease can kind of make that even worse. And then it brings up the larger question is, without our memories, like what are we and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, one of the taglines of this season was "What is real?"
Yeah.
And what they basically answer that as the show goes on. They say, what is real is that which is irreplaceable, i.e., your memories, and that's why we have Dolores, losing her memories at the end, because that she loses her identity essentially.
Yeah.
And this was, and it's used in a slightly different way. In season 2, memory was used a bit like Memento, in that Bernard was trying to piece together. He was like the detective, and I think he's even said he was like the kind of detective character. He didn't really have much to do in this season, but that was that was how they used memory. It was this idea of how memory is fallible and how our perception can be altered by viewing different events at different times. Whereas in this one, it was very much more tied to identity and who we are as a person, and how it frames our motivations and attitudes. Dolores's a memory of her, despite all of the ugliness that she strives for some sort of beautiful world, even though she kills lots of people relentlessly to get there. But that's another thing I'll pick up on later. Whereas Maeve is driven by the memory of her daughter, and William is sort of driven. I don't know. He's actually the only one that's different from that, in that he blocks out his memories and actually actively kills them in a way to. I mean, you get the idea that was Bernard sort of says to him, no, it wasn't him. It was right at the end. They said, you thought there was some difference between the real world and Westworld, and it was really the Westworld was all you. It was all the same, basically. So, he's the complete and sort of antithesis of that, in that he needs to destroy his bad memory, or he thinks he can somehow change by destroying his bad memories. But yeah.
As a side note to that, with William, it's interesting how, like kind of based on the podcast again, stuff like that, that there was discussion about how, for most of the actors, they're just fine with like kind of the fact that like they would pretty much just know what was going on with their character based on the weak script and stuff like that. Whereas Ed Harris is somebody who really likes to know the arc of his character, and so based on his, based on that to kind of make his acting decisions and stuff. So apparently he really didn't like that, and in some ways that like, it was just kind of the joke was that like he kind of was really begging to get written off, I guess, and stuff. Which really the irony of that though is that like, okay, the way they did it though in this finale, major spoiler, was that then they had the robot, the host version of himself, killing him off, so he's still back. So I mean, it's not as though they're going to actually have like a actor double as him, because like certainly you could do that with CGI or something like that, but like kind of I mean, I don't see them doing that at all. And if anything, that like it still comes down to the human Ed Harris's acting. It's going to be what drives like kind of the William character going forward into season 4.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see if they continue, if they let him evolve as a character, because essentially Hale says right at the end that we just took all the simplest bit. It was really easy to emulate you, but it makes you wonder if they are going to let him evolve as a character, because of course we saw the flash forward at the end of season 2 with him visiting Delos far into the future.
Right.
So I mean, I'm hoping that they actually go that far into the future with season 4, because that's
right.
I don't think you can have a season 4 without Bernard at all, which is what you'd have to do to have an interim period, judging by the thing. But yeah, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, but I mean, I think William has always been this. Well, very much through season 2, he was this vehicle of what is free will? Do we have a choice in our actions? Are we that predictable? And ultimately, they took that choice away from him right at the end. He's always questioning, is he real or not? Is he a host? And then they answer that very clearly for you at the end.
Yeah, because I think that was part of the guessing game that we had with him in the previous season was, was he a host? Like kind of the whole time stuff, and I think that for effect really made you kind of question the reality and stuff, and then so. You had like kind of like you said, the memento effect in that respect, and I thought I think the problem we ran into is that like different people didn't like that. They just wanted to kind of have it they wanted to get to that point sooner, and I think how it works as a device though is that like it does make you want to kind of go back and kind of like look at how different scenes before, with the belief that like maybe he was a host, how that played out. And then now knowing, that he is human and stuff, does that scene look different and everything? I feel like, if anything, for me, it was effective, I guess. I thought anyways. Even though that, like, it probably just drove even Ed Harris, the actor, crazy as well, because he wasn't sure whether he was supposed to play things one way or the other and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to seem like I have some hindsight but I never sort of thought that William was a host.
Okay.
I always kind of took his inner turmoil as him trying to reconcile his pretty bad behavior with, trying to be also this, pillar of society. That was kind of his narrative, and it seems like his success in the world mirrors how bad he got in the park, or that's the kind of impression you get. So
yeah, for me, like the only reason why I was really questioned was the fact that like they did that with Delos, like kind of the fidelity test and stuff, and I thought that was why that was a particularly effective episode, was like kind of showing that like kind of that they could do that, and then but this subsequent result being that like it's always going to be imperfect copy and everything, and so that for me, like kind of, well, if they did that to him, then why wouldn't they do that to William and stuff? And so that's where, for me, like kind of the question got planted. And I thought, and for me, I liked that. I liked the fact that, like, you weren't sure then and stuff. And then especially right up to when he kills Emily and stuff like that, that then it made you kind of really question, like, was that why, like, they even did that, was the fact that, like, ultimately he maybe even killed himself because he couldn't live the guilt and stuff. But all that to me, like, kind of is going back to what our original discussion was, like, kind of, is that memory then, like, kind of, what made him, and then, putting that into robot, host rather, what does that really mean then? Like, kind of, is that host now William, in the sense of where, like, okay, like, kind of the body, the human body's dead, so now you have this host that has these memories. So is that really William then? And so can he, as the host, William, fix things and stuff, and then therefore be kind of like this better being, I guess, if you will, like, kind of, or does that redeem it and stuff?
No, I don't see him as being the character. I think we're trying to almost recreate a Yul Brynner here. It's like I think they're going to simplify his character and make him more of a straightforward, aggressive kind of character. I could be wrong, maybe, but I think the whole reason of having that fidelity test episode was to show that you can't really put a human consciousness.
Yeah, sure.
So you've got to recreate the components, which I think is what this new William is.
All right. So I guess for you, it's not even really a discussion. I guess for me, it's this idea that, like, if we were able to actually have a fidelity test to show that you can, replicate a human, right, to the degree that, like, it doesn't stutter, it doesn't kind of, that it does function and stuff like that, then is that, like, an actual William then and stuff? I guess, for the series, it's really a moot point because, they basically show that it's not possible and stuff. But I guess for me, I still had that kind of question that, like, if you were able to do, like, kind of, take you, Dan, and, like, kind of your memories and stuff, because, like, apparently you're just a book's worth of, and stuff, and we put that into host effectively, that is working, then is that, Dan then and stuff, So
Absolutely.
for me, that's the question that I think, I guess it's still a question for me. Like, even though I think the series answer to that, like, like you said, that it's just not, it's shown as not possible because the human spirit, if you will, is like, more than that. And in fact, that's kind of like, I think, really the other kind of key idea through this last episode is that besides free will, what is this thing called the human spirit and stuff?
Well, I don't even think you need to sort of even get to spirit. I think this is something that I've heard David Deutsch talk about, which is this idea of, like, science and knowledge being separate from the substrate. So this is what I kind of was saying, and I think this is kind of what they're saying in Westworld, is that as a human being, you're tied to your substrate, which is your body, and trying to just lift the knowledge out and plonk it in an AI is not going to work. You need to re-engineer the knowledge itself into a system that already works, and then make a simulation of it rather than an actual copy. But,
and really, like, kind of what you just said there, like, kind of really reflects what happened with Dolores being split into the Charlotte Dolores then, because after she embodied Charlotte's body, she really started kind of, like, saying, like, no, I'm no longer just you or copy of you and stuff like that. She, like, kind of basically starts feeling invested in the Dolores, existence and life and stuff like that, with the family, the son and the former husband and stuff like that. And I think there's truth to that, because, to me, like, along with, like, kind of memories are the choices, so in other words, we're constantly making new memories through our choices, and each different one that you make puts you on a different path from the original, set of choices, so so the minute that, like, you make that split, you're just no longer, like, kind of, like, in other words, the minute that they made that split with Dolores even and stuff to Charlotte, it was no longer Dolores then.